Hey, this is Tim, bringing you words of grace today from Union Square. I'm here with Abraham Lincoln behind me. Wanted to share a couple videos, I guess a series, a playlist of videos that talk about facts that support our faith. As Christians, we should know these facts, and if you're a skeptic, you should consider them as well. Our faith is not one that's a blind leap in the dark. They're actually factual, historical evidence for the things we believe. Some people ask, was Jesus married to Mary Magdalene? Did Jesus marry Mary Magdalene? So let's ask Abe Lincoln here, did that happen? No, he says no. He says absolutely not. But I do remember when the Da Vinci Code came out that says this type of thing, which is fiction, right? It's not documented, it's fiction. But when that came out, one of my buddies who was a security guard with me, I was a pastor too, but in his mind, I was no longer a pastor, right? This came out, and this is truth, and he's going to side with this silly view. And yet there's no historical fact for it. It's all fiction. In fact, I'm going to quote somebody that I never agree with, but he would not be a friend of Christianity, Bart Ehrman, but he is a scholar, and this is one area that we would agree. This is his book, Peter, Paul, and Mary Magdalene. I'm going to read one paragraph from that. As we've seen, a lot of historical claims of the Da Vinci Code are simply wrong. It is not true. For example, the Dead Sea Scrolls contain Gospels that discussed Mary and Jesus. It's just not true. As serious historians have found such claims outrageous. Those of us with a better sense of humor just find them outrageously funny. I don't think it's funny, these claims, because people like my buddy, who was a security guard, believed them. And yet there's no historical basis whatsoever for it. No documents contain any of this type of information. So where would this come from? I think from folks who don't want to believe the historical accounts of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Now, there are a group of documents. Let me just take a minute with this, because there are a group of documents, and every Easter or Christmas, people will say they found this hidden document that tells the real story of Jesus and disagrees with the New Testament. These are Gnostic documents. They're called Gnostic documents. The Gnostics were a group, real quick history lesson, they grew out of Plato's idea of the dichotomy between spirit and flesh and good and evil. The true Christian church went against these types of beliefs. And more importantly, and this is why we are at the statue of Abraham Lincoln, they were written after the time of Jesus. They were not written during his life and ministry. And yet the Gospels, the New Testament, the truth, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, his true sayings in life, were written during his time period by those who knew him, who lived with him, who heard his sayings, who knew these people and interviewed them. So it is not... There's no warrant to make authoritative these documents that are written 150 years after Jesus. And that would be the primary teachers that became more popular of Gnostic writings, 150 AD and to 450 AD. So, just a quick illustration. What if I were to post something about Abraham Lincoln on my blog? Okay, so 150 years later, and I decide to say that Abraham Lincoln was not for the Union, but he was actually a spy. He was a Native American spy, and he was shot not by Booth, but by the great-great-grandson of George Washington. What would you think of that? Well, that would get no credence, although, you know, the way people believe conspiracy theories today, who knows what someone would pick up. But this is my point. Fast forward 2,000 years. What would you think of a documentary or a group that instead of believing the writings written 150 years earlier about Lincoln that were consistently together, and they were able to talk to people who knew him. They knew him, they walked with him, they read his letters. What would you think of someone who saw all that and is doing a documentary about him, but then saw this blog by Tim Richmond, and they said, wait a second, hold the presses. Let's not follow the narrative that is clearly spoken by all these eyewitnesses. Let's go forward with this guy writing 150 years later that completely disagrees with it, because it's the new secret life of Abraham. Who would say that they have no academic credibility at all? And I would say the same thing. You need to go to the sources, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the things that were written by those who knew Jesus at the time or shortly after. Not things written 150 years later. That is ridiculous. It really is. So let me encourage you to do that. Pick up Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Read for yourself the things he said. Of course, we know these are written by the Holy Spirit through these individuals, as promised by Jesus. And Jesus also promised that they will set you free. Jesus said in John 8, come to him, his sayings, because they're truth. Come to the truth. This truth, the sayings of Jesus will set you free.